Ash Brandon is here today on the Brave Writer podcast to help us think about video games, technology, AI, education, and more. Ash is a middle school teacher in Boulder, Colorado, with an education specialist degree. They have spoken across the country about how academic spaces can mimic game structures to make learning compelling, motivating, and engaging. Ash believes games, specifically entertainment-based games, can help us create better teaching, more engaged learning, increased empathy, more inclusive classrooms, and motivated lifelong learners. You might know Ash because they have an amazing Instagram account, which is The Gamer Educator. Please join me in welcoming Ash to the Brave Writer podcast. So today is a fun day for me. Ash and I were both just saying it's like a full circle moment. Melissa is out right now, so it's just the two of us. And I remember way back when you were new to Instagram and one of my followers said, "Hey, have you seen Ash Brandon?" And at that point, I think you had like 362 followers. And I was immediately taken with your content. Today, you're like over 220,000 followers on Instagram. You have a book deal. Ash, what's it like to be you?
Oh my gosh, Julie. Well, it's very surreal, first of all. And thank you so much. I am not exaggerating when I say, like, if it weren't for you, I don't think I would be here. Like, I talk all the time about how my first sort of foray into Instagram and getting a hold in communities was in homeschool communities, and a lot of them through you. So
amazing.
I'm just so thrilled. So what's it like to be me? I mean, it's great, right? It's fun. It's very unpredictable. Never know where you're going to be.
Amazing. Well, one of the reasons I think that you are resonating so much with adults, parents right now, is that it seems like online life, screens, games are getting an extra level of attention in the media right now. We know there's The Anxious Generation written by Jonathan Haidt. There are lots and lots of parenting experts who are giving very strong suggestions around screens. I literally, right before I hopped on this with you, Ash, was reading a Substack that was a letter that you write to your 16-year-old about the phone that you're giving them. And they said it's not a contract, but when I read it, it felt like a contract that was written in very lovey-dovey language. And it went on and on. My first thought was, have you met teens? They're not going to read that many words. Like, that is just way too many words. And it feels very manipulative to me. What are you seeing? How are you understanding this moment with screens and parents and teenagers and experts?
Well, I think that we're at an interesting time in that we're seeing many things feel more quote unquote normal or typical as they maybe did 5-10 years ago. And we're also seeing some things that have not adjusted back to where we maybe think they should be. And I was actually just at a conference related to kids and families and media, and this came up quite a bit. I kept hearing things like, well, we're through COVID, and therefore it's like we should be over some of these things. And yet there was also acknowledgement of, well, actually, a lot of these things were issues before COVID. And I think that we, obviously, as parents, caregivers, we want to do right by kids, and educators want to do right by kids. And it is really hard to tackle some of these things. And what might be a long-term solution is probably a really complicated one, probably involves so many things. And if there is something that is within our control, it feels like, well, we should do that first, because at least then we can do something. And if we can blame something, whether that's phones or social media or a certain app or a video game, what have you, then it absolves us, right? It means it's not us, it's not our kids, it's not our parenting. However, that doesn't end up helping us if the thing that we're blaming is maybe a symptom itself of the same underlying problem. So I think it's a really complicated time, and I'm hoping that we can find more ways to talk about the root cause and not just focus on the symptoms that come up from it.
Yeah, okay. So now you've got me interested. We're talking about foundational issues that are being solved and blamed by screens. What are those issues that you think we are ignoring in favor of regulating how children behave with technology?
I think that a lot of what we're looking at when we look at things like behavior or I can't mental health outcomes, so I can't speak to that as terms of like expertise.
Sure.
Even things that came up in Jonathan Haidt's book about how there is less independence in childhood now than there used to be. There are less opportunities for community building. I agree with all of those things 100%. However, I would not say that the advent of a smartphone is the reason we don't have those things. And especially when we look at the use of technology and reliance or over-reliance on technology with like younger kids, not just smartphones, but iPads, TV, video games, etc. Most parents, the majority of parents, are using screens as a way of getting things done. Right?
Yeah, right.
Meeting needs, right? And often meeting adult needs. And that can make us feel really guilty. But the problem there is not that an adult is using a screen to meet a need. The problem is that they have no other way of meeting that need, right? That is the problem.
That is such an excellent point. In other words, if we had more of a community where our kids could be playing next door with the neighbors while I was doing a load of laundry and starting dinner, and then could swap for my friend. And I actually had this experience when I lived in California. I had a best friend who lived in our same condo unit, and our kids would just freely migrate between our two condos. And we didn't have a television that entire time. This is before the internet, but we had no television. We had no videos. We just lived our lives, and I didn't miss it. When I moved to Ohio with my 5 kids, we were in a neighborhood now where I didn't have neighbors who had stay-at-home kids. I didn't have friends in the neighborhood. So when it was time to make dinner, they watched PBS, every day. And I don't feel guilty about that because it was my only option to be able to have like a moment to my mind's self to fulfill some of these other tasks, to listen to a book on tape or whatever. So that's the first time I've heard someone kind of identify, like I'd never made that connection before, that we didn't need it at all in California because we had a community. At one point, there were 5 families on my street who were homeschooling, which is unheard of today. So we would say, let's go do a picnic. And we'd call 4 other families and we would all go outside and do that together. And yet today, like living in Ohio, I was in my car anytime I needed to see someone. Much more difficult sort of navigating to create that community you're talking about.
Right. And even if we have maybe not the community, but there are other things that could fill in for that, like, playing in the backyard or what have you. Well, many, many, many families are precluded from those things due to other systemic inequities.
Right.
If my neighborhood doesn't have a playground or it's not safe, I can't send my kid there. If I don't have a backyard, I can't send my kid there. If I live in an area that is really in extreme weather, I can't necessarily rely on that. And none of those things are the fault of an individual. However, the consequences end up falling often on individual caregivers. So then we feel like, well, somehow it's my fault. I'm not doing enough. We're all doing more than we've probably ever had to before. And that's stressing us. And like you said, if your kids are watching TV and then you're able to decompress a bit and make a meal, that is benefiting your kids, right? Like they're getting their own break watching TV, which is fine in its own merits. However, if we're really looking at the benefit of that screen time, well, you're a more present, pleasant parent.
Yes,
and they're eating a meal that you probably wouldn't have been able to make otherwise.
that's right.
And then you can be more present together at the dinner table. Like that sounds like a win to me, actually. That sounds like a benefit.
That's how it felt to me at the time. I think one of the storylines that I hear all the time from parents, they don't like me to compare television to the internet, because the internet seems to have. I remember someone said to me, well, it's the algorithms. I'm like, TV had algorithms. The other night, I was trading commercials from childhood with my boyfriend. We both grew up at the same time. We can remember, like, we could go for like 15 minutes back and forth, commercial jingles. These are designed to hook you, and we've been hooked for 50, 60 years. So we want to be careful not to say that TV is somehow devoid of any kind of algorithmic pressure. I mean, especially in the advertisement based television. Today with streaming, some of you may not know that feeling or recognize it as well. However, I will admit that the internet has, it just has a lot more dangers lurking around the corners. Can you describe what some of those are and even maybe some of the ways you have handled them in your family?
I think this might be a bizarre reference to make, but when I was in high school, I read the play No Exit by the existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre. Okay. And there's
Loved
a very
that play.
there is an extremely famous line from it, which is that hell is other people. and, and every time I get asked a question like this, that is what plays through my mind. And I don't mean it literally, but really it's like anytime you are losing a sense of control and other people are gaining a sense of control over something that you or your kids might be exposed to, that's where it starts, for me anyway, that's where it starts to feel potentially dangerous, right? Like you're right. Yes, television and producers and writers and companies are absolutely controlling what is seen on television or in print media.
Yes.
Right. This predates the advent of television.
That's right.
However, when it is there's still a feeling of more faith in that, even though it still might be insidious. There's some sort of regulation or vetting or some process. And with the internet, it has that town square element, and it could be literally anyone saying literally anything. And that is scary. And I think it should feel scary.
Yes.
I don't think we should be saying that there's no problem with that. Absolutely. Where I think it becomes difficult is, it can feel like Pandora's box. Like, how do I say yes to this in a way that isn't saying yes to everything? Or we might feel like, oh, if I say yes, you can have a computer, you can use the iPad, you can have a smartphone with the internet. I'm apparently condoning every app and every interaction in any amount of time. It does not have to be that way. Like there is a middle ground, and we want to find that middle ground because ultimately, as I know you talk about all the time, we are raising adults, right? We're raising future adults, and they are going to live in a world that has a relationship to technology that we can't even fully imagine.
It's about to change again. We'll talk about that in a minute, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. And we want them to be prepared for that. And abstinence only education doesn't tend to work very well, right? No matter what we're talking about.
Do you think that this access to, the whole world on a phone should be delayed until kids are 16 or 18? Or do you see value in kids learning how to manage it at any younger ages? My kids grew up in a time where we were transitioning from flip phones to internet-based phones. And so by the time they were adults, that change had been completed. But today, I'm watching my granddaughter. She knows how to unlock my phone without me. I don't even know how she figured it out, right? Like she's in there taking selfies. She's flipping through apps. She's 5 years old. So they're being raised in a very different environment. What is your thought on when a child is ready for that kind of responsibility of how to use a phone like that?
I think that it is a constant work in progress. And I think something I tend to not do is I tend to not give like an age, because age is a number, and we like to think that it carries with it a ton of meaning necessarily, but it doesn't. And it's much more about readiness, and identifying a skill. And something that I talk about some, but I go into a lot more in my book that's coming out is identifying, like, is this something I need to protect my child from?
Mm.
Or is this a skill I want them to build? And even within something like a phone, both of those things could be true in many different ways, right? Like maybe I need to protect them from being able to access the majority of the internet,
Yes.
or certain apps, or interactions with other people within certain apps, what have you, right? Those nuances. However, I also might want them to build the skill of time management or communication, or finding ways to do some executive functioning skill that can sometimes be benefited by technology, or what have you. So I think you can be doing both of those things. And just as we teach our kids to ride a bike and the area we let them go to expands over time and what we allow them to do, we can do the same thing with things like technology.
You know, you mentioned Jonathan Haidt earlier talking about how kids need some opportunities to exercise independence. And I was ironically this morning scrolling through the phone, and a mom was showing her 7-year-old go into Chick-fil-A alone to purchase his own meal, get change, bring it all back to the car. And he was adorable, 7 years old. Of course, she's videotaping the whole thing. Like the meta levels of
Oh,
this
yes.
were blowing my mind. We're teaching our child to be off the phone, and we're videotaping it on the phone to share on the phone, right? Like there's a lot going on there. But I really thought he was adorable. And my favorite thing was when he got back in the car, she said, "How was that for you?" He said, "My legs were shaking the whole time." She said, "Did you like it?" He said, "I want to do it again." And I thought to myself that this was kind of an interesting dynamic. The idea that we're asking kids to have executive function and authority over a phone when we're afraid to let them go in a store alone at 7 is interesting, right? Like that took huge courage for this mom to let her child do that. I thought back to when I was a child, and when I was age 8, my mom let me ride my bike like down this long, pretty busy street. It had crosswalks with lights. And I went to a drive-through to buy wax paper to do a craft at home. So at 8 years old, with cash in my pocket, rode my bike by myself, went to this drive-through, bought it, came all the way home, and the project was grading crayons and then ironing them between sheets of wax paper, which is also like you're dealing with a hot iron, you're dealing
Yes.
with a sharp grader, you're
Oh my
riding
gosh,
your
yes.
bike. And that was normal at age 8 back then. Today, I feel like that whole project would be so thoroughly supervised. What are ways, one of the things, Ash, that I say to parents when they say to me, I can't get my child off the phone, I say, well, what is the alternative to the phone that you're offering them? A lot of times I hear parents say to me, I just want them off the phone. And I'm like, and so what? They sit on a couch? Like if you said to your child, here is a box of nails and a hammer and a whole bunch of scrap lumber, they'll get off the phone. If you say to them, I know this one sounds really risky, but start a fire in the backyard, they'll get off the phone. Because the idea of this risk and adventure, this thing that is adult that they could be doing, that's what the phone represents. It is an adult technology. It feels like driving a car. We need to give them sewing machines, KitchenAid mixers, buzz saws, things that feel equally interesting to tackle. What do you think?
Oh, I mean, so much. First of all, I have to say, so my family, we're lucky enough. I work in education, so I'm not teaching in the summer. We are lucky enough that we get to spend a lot of time in the summer not at home. And so the last couple of years, we've spent most of the summer in Japan. And people might have some awareness. There's some shows that have come onto Netflix that show very, very young kids, like 2, 3, 4 years old, who go about their day. And that is true.
Wow.
Our first trip with our child to Japan, we were walking, and there were these kindergartners, 5 and 6 years old, walking in the street. And my child looked up to me and said, "Where are their adults?" And I said, "Oh, honey, they're commuting. This, they're walking to school together in like the busiest train station in the world, right?
Wow.
And so one thing that our child really, really grew into was being able to do some of those more independent things in a foreign country with a language that they do not speak, but they still were better set up to do that than in many places in America. Like talking about sending my kid into a Chick-fil-A alone, like I wouldn't be able to send my child into a 7-Eleven if I sat in the parking lot because I wouldn't necessarily know that they are, if they struggle, that someone might help them, or is someone going to see them as a nuisance, a problem, something to be solved. But by the end of our trip in Japan, both summers, our child would be waking up in the morning. We would leave out a couple coins. They would go across the street, go to the convenience store, buy breakfast, come home, let themselves in. And I mean, I think about being a kid, and the closest I got to that was like being in a hotel and going down the hall and buying something from the vending machine. And even then I was like thrilled. So I mean, those opportunities are great. And there are many ways in which, as a society, we make that harder for parents who want to lean into that for their kids. I mean, things like crime, not even getting into the conversation. Something else that you bring up that I think is really, really important is two things. One, and I know this is going to be really an unpleasant thing to hear from many people, and I am saying it to myself, and know it's really hard when people say something like, well, I just wish they weren't on the phone, or I don't want them to be on the phone anymore. Who is in charge of that decision? And if it is a decision we have allowed our child to be in charge of, then if we have a problem with that, then that is our choice to change. Like that is our decision to change. And I understand that is much easier said than done. Don't get me wrong. But we do have to look at that as if we say, hey, you can do whatever you want with this hour, and they spend the whole hour playing video games, well,
yeah,
we said you could do whatever, right? So if that's not okay, it's okay for us to say it's not okay, but we do have to make that clear. And that's part of finding a way of modeling that balance so that they are getting multiple things happening in their lives and not just defaulting to technology. The other thing is, like you mentioned, where tech can represent freedom in some way, like you said, adulthood.
yes.
However, it also gives many kids a sense of control and power and autonomy that
Oof.
they might not have in a lot of their lives, especially in public school. All day long, they're being told what to do. And they get to come home and open up Minecraft, and they're the only one in control, and they can't make mistakes, and no one's going to yell at them. Like, that is a really empowering feeling, whether or not we want to recognize that as a positive. Like, it is, they are feeling empowered by that, and they're feeling in control from that. We don't want that to be the only way they feel those things, right? We don't want them to think, I am only good at thinking creatively in Minecraft, because then the only way they will ever feel that is by playing Minecraft. We want them to feel that in many different ways. And that comes from exposing them to those other opportunities, even when they might not always like it. They might say, but I wanted to play Minecraft. All right, well, we're not going to do that right now. And instead, we're going to melt wax between wax paper and see what happens, right? To show that it might not be as immediate. It might not be as intensely, densely satisfying right away. And it's still another way of feeling the same thing, so that they don't think the only way I feel this is through technology.
You know, I love that idea of Minecraft being the comparison, because that's something that they build up over time. It's something that they're working on that has a trajectory, right? It's not a slot machine that you just do it once and then you're just repeating the same behavior. I had a friend who had two sons, and she was a quilter, and she taught both of her boys to sew and make quilts. They were public school kids, and they got to the point where these boys got up an hour early in the morning to work on their quilts for an hour before they went to school. And I remember thinking at the time that this was really a powerful example of giving a child something that was theirs, that had like purpose that lasted longer than the hour. A lot of times parents are like, how can I distract my child away from tech instead of identifying the properties of the tech that keep kids interested and then finding like the analog version of that that would tap into that. Is that what you're saying? That's kind of, it sounds like that's what you're saying.
100%. Absolutely. And one of the ways that I personally advise people to do that, which I think feels difficult, is to actually lean into the technological interests that they have. I think that many caregivers think, oh, but if I do that, then I'm condoning it. Well, first of all, that's not going to stop them from doing it necessarily, as you mentioned. But what's really important is, if I'm looking at whatever they're playing or doing, right? If I'm looking at it as the enemy,
Yeah.
then I am, as an adult, I am not going to see anything of value in it.
Right.
And my kid is going to pick up on that. And so then if my child is feeling accomplished, in control, whatever, they're happy, they're proud of something they did in technology. If they know that I think that that's a waste of time, they're not going to come to me with that. They're not going to share it with me. And that is obviously we're missing out on a connection opportunity there, but we're also making it so that we are not able to see and pick up on the skills underneath, right? Instead of thinking like, oh, okay, you beat that level. Just taking the time to ask like, well, what was that? Or what'd you have to do? Or how much did you try? And listening to what they're telling us. We don't have to know what all the words mean. We don't have to know like who the characters are, right?
Right.
But if we can hear through to the skill and hear like, oh, wow, so you were having to strategize in real time with a bunch of other people, or you were managing, you were dictating what everyone should be doing, right? There's a lot to glean from that. And so now suddenly we're like, oh, wow, you really like things that are in the moment or improvisational. Well, okay, suddenly that can translate into taking an improv theater class or going to an open mic night or doing like a martial art that's sparring based and you're having to come up with what you're doing in the moment, right? All of a sudden we can see lots of entry points so that, again, what we're showing our kids is, oh, your interest might not just be Fortnite. Your interest might be working with other people or problem solving with other people or building collaboratively. And that's very hard to see if we're coming at it with the enemy is the tech.
So I want to talk to you about my brand new book that's coming out April 15th. But I notice I have like this twinge of reluctance. And I was trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, and this is what I realized. This is my fourth book I've told you about. And so there's a bit of a difference between announcing my very first book and the fourth one. It's sort of like the difference between saying, hey, I'm pregnant for the first time, and everyone throws you a shower and buys you gifts. And by the fourth kid, you're like, I'm pregnant. It's my fourth baby. And everyone's like, good for you. But here's the funny thing about this particular book. It really is the culmination of everything I've worked on for 25 years in Brave Writer. My publisher came to me and said, Julie, don't you want like a book, a book that can be checked out off of a library shelf, a book that can be purchased and listened to while you're washing dishes or taking a walk? And I realized that's true. It would be nice to create something that could outlive me, that wasn't just curriculum, but could help parents of kids who are in school as well, not just the homeschooling community. And then I wondered, well, what would be the angle I should take for that project? And I suddenly knew. If I think about the number one complaint of kids around writing, it's this. They say, I hate writing. And that's when I knew I had it. This book is called Help, My Kid Hates Writing. And my goal is to transform both the experience of your young writer and your experience coaching them in writing. I know you're going to like it because I tried to make it interesting to read. I have humor, examples, and a lot of information that you won't get from our Brave Writer curriculum. There's a whole chapter on AI. There is a lot of attention paid to healing the damage that writing instruction in its traditional format cause to adults and kids. So thanks for pre-ordering, especially in hardback, which helps the book make bestseller lists. Wouldn't that be cool to have a book written by someone in the home education space actually show up on one of those bestseller lists? I'd be amazed if that ever occurred, but I'd love it to happen. So thank you. You can order this book anywhere books are sold, but we will include a link in the show notes to my brand new author website. I figured by the time I had a fourth book, I probably needed a website as an author. So you can take a look at that as well. Thanks again for all your support over the years. I hope this book helps you, helps your cousins, helps your best friends, helps the lady that is the writing coach that you hired to help your kid. Thanks for pre-ordering. Make sure you hang on to your receipt. We have some pre-order bonuses coming that you won't want to miss, and I'll share about those soon. Again, it's Help, My Kid Hates Writing, How to Turn Struggling Students into Brave Writers. Go to juliebogartwriter.com. So do you think that when a child is sitting there playing, because the parent is used to sort of quote unquote indulging the text so they can get something done, they do check out in a way that they wouldn't check out as much if it was building Lego, which is out in front of them. It's not hiding on a screen, right? Or if they see their child, sitting in the corner knitting, it's like you can kind of see it happening. But when it's on a screen, unless you're like really tuned in, and they're usually wearing headphones, so you aren't listening to the sounds, it's almost like you can't believe something is actually valuable happening because you've never sat with it. I remember when my son yelled at me to come and watch him play this game because his team was competing at this very high level and they were being broadcast into South Korea. I hadn't even known he had gotten good at this game, let alone that they were on the top 10 leaderboard of the whole world. And I had missed so much. Meanwhile, I had gone to all of his chess tournaments, which are incredibly boring. But chess is so prestigious. I went, right? But then when it came to video games, I was like, that's the thing you do when I need a minute to work,
Yeah.
And so I love that you're saying watching and being a part of their joy and their success and their pride in their accomplishments is part of this story, isn't it? What do we do when we have a kid who's playing a game and they inevitably don't beat the level, get frustrated, punch a hole in the wall, start screaming and crying? A lot of parents tell me it proves that the gaming is bad for their mental health. How do you see that, Ash?
I love everything that you said, and I really love the analogy that you made, the comparison of with they're producing something, physically in front of us, because that goes both ways. If we saw them drawing, building a Lego tower, etc., we would praise their final product, obviously. However, if we noticed that it fell over in the middle, or they had to crumple up the paper and start over 5-10 times, we would also recognize that as a loss, as a difficulty. And we would empathize, or at least understand and validate that setback. So just like the triumph of things like gaming is missing, the tragedy is also often missing, because all we see is the kid who's throwing the iPad and yelling. But what we aren't seeing is the time, the investment, the stakes, right?
Yes.
But if that same kid were, trying to build a house of cards and they all came down at the last minute, we would be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We wouldn't go, it's fine, you do it again, right?
Yeah.
We would understand that.
Or we wouldn't, and we certainly wouldn't say, don't ever touch cards again. They make you unhappy, right?
Yes. We would not blame the cards.
Yeah,
we would
right.
not blame the Lego.
No.
And I know people will say like, well, it's designed differently. Yes, it is designed differently. But what good does it do to blame the thing? It makes us feel better. I get it. It is nice to blame the thing. However, what skill does that impart to your child for next time?
Yeah.
What is going to be different next time And probably the answer is nothing. And again, when we are not necessarily, I'm not saying see the tech as the best thing they do with their time.
Right.
You can still dislike it compared to other things, but we can acknowledge that it has validity in our child's life. And we can acknowledge that it is an area where they can practice and learn these same kinds of skills. So a kid who is, throwing an iPad and yelling, okay, that to me is not about the iPad. That is about the underlying feeling and behavior. And that's about, okay, does this kid know how to recognize when they're getting overwhelmed, if they're getting dysregulated? What are the tells that this child has when this is happening? And do they know how to stop? Do they know what to do to take a break? And do those strategies, are they effective for this kind of feeling? And in the same way that if our people were building with magnet tiles and they were getting frustrated because every time they try to put it on, it falls down, we would probably say, let's come over here and have a drink. Like, let's take a break. We would build in those opportunities to decompress, to regulate. And we're teaching them the skill of being able to step away, of being able to calm down. They are going to need those skills with things like technology. Those skills apply across media types, whether that's analog or digital.
It's so true. In fact, one of the things you said earlier is that a child will hide their triumphs because they know that you don't value tech. They even more hold on way too long to showing mounting frustration because they're afraid if they show it, they'll be told they can't play. And so by the time they finally show it, they have been concealing it for so long, it sort of pours out of them almost like vomiting. And then we're like, wow, you're really sick. When really what they need to feel is that they can come to you when they're getting frustrated and say, I keep trying to beat this level. I can't beat it. I just want to cry about it. So that you are included in the solution and that they know they'll be sent back to finishing the job, not that they will be taken away from it and left in their endless frustration. It's like, let's say you went out and you left your wallet at Starbucks and you get home and now you're like freaked out and the store is closed, and if the only thing the person kept telling you is don't go to Starbucks anymore, and you can't stop thinking about this wallet, it's going to be in your imagination till you're allowed to go back and see if it's still there. That's kind of how this feels. We don't want our kids to sit there and be mentally preoccupied with the thing they were about to solve or break through. We want to support them in problem solving the game, not just the dysregulation.
Absolutely. And to use your analogy, if the response we were getting from our partner or our loved one was, well, just don't go to Starbucks,
Yeah.
right? Then for one thing, we're not learning a skill, right?
Yeah.
We're not learning the skill of, okay, my tendency is to forget this. Like, so what can I do next time to prevent that from happening? We're also learning from that interaction. If this happens again, I should not tell them, right?
Right.
I should keep this to myself.
That's right.
And like you were mentioning earlier, we want kids to be able to come to us when they are excited about things. And a big part of that is the digital safety piece. If we want kids to be able to come to us when something potentially unsafe or worrisome or weird or bad or whatever is happening online, they first have to be able to come to us when something is safe.
That's so true.
That safety often looks like things they're excited about, things they think are funny, things that they are getting shared between friends, whatever it is. But they have to know that they can come to us with that, that it'll at least be seen as like valid, right? So that they know if things go poorly, they can still come to us. And the focus will be on the problem or the skill and not on the delivery mechanism, right? Whether it was through an app or in person or digital or analog.
Because you're a school teacher, do you have feelings about phones in school? I know there are a lot of questions about that. And I also have a niece who their school went completely iPad. And I have questions about that in terms of reading, like they were just getting shortened texts and not full length books. So, talk to me about schools, screen free phones, iPads for textbooks. What do you think about all
Yeah.
that?
Oh my gosh. I have like we could have a whole
A whole
separate
book?
hour long. Oh my God. A whole book for real. I think it is very interesting that the focus is always phones in school, as if every other technology that is available in school is like morally superior and is going to be complete. Like, obviously, the big thing is social media, right? Social
Right.
media isn't going to be accessible on a Chromebook, probably not an iPad, not like a laptop. And I completely get that. So I don't have an issue with this in principle, mostly, honestly, because of like kind of consent issues. Because when everyone has a phone, everyone also has like a way of documenting everything that happens, and that gets into
Yes.
some really, really uncomfortable places.
Yes.
However, I will just say, like, again, this came up a lot in Hate's book and has been brought up a lot of places of having a no cell phone policy. And I will just say, as a parent who lives in America, um, we can't truly tackle that until we talk about gun reform.
Ha. Thank you.
We cannot have that conversation. If you really want to not have kids have to have a phone at school, then you need to remove the risk that they will need to reach out to their parent to tell them that they are in imminent physical danger.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I hate that I'm saying that, but I will just say, like, if any policy that we're thinking about implementing on students, every educator should be equally willing to agree to that policy for themselves.
Oh, wow. I like that
And
too.
and you could not pay me probably any amount of money to be willing to not have my phone on me all day. First of all, I actually use it a lot in my job because I'm moving around a lot. But like I have been in lockdowns that were not drills, and the very first thing I did was, take out my phone, tell my spouse, see if anything's being posted, try to get information, and I would not be willing to do that a lot of time without that connection. So again, it's easy to go to the symptom and ignore what one of the underlying things. Obviously, that a kid needing to potentially reach out to their parent is not an excuse to be on social media at school. I understand that, but if we really want to tackle that problem, there are bigger, harder conversations to be having. But when it comes to the broader use of technology, I think people will be surprised to hear me say this, but I am someone who thinks that technology is valid and is a very useful tool and is an appropriate, valid leisure activity. And that doesn't always mean that it is the correct tool for the job.
Mm.
And in education spaces, I am actually much less likely to want to use technology than some of my peers, and I think than people would assume from me.
Yeah.
They would think like, oh, they must be using tech all the time. Actually, I would rather not unless I really have to, and especially like we're constantly talking about how like kids don't know how to find information without the internet. Like we used to have to go to the libraries and actually look up books and find information in books. But okay, if we want that to change, then we need to make it so that school districts are not spending hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year in subscriptions to online services that put all of the curriculum online or that promise better testing outcomes through personalized instruction. For one thing, that's just AI.
Yeah.
Very-
Right. Right.
That's just AI. Those are AI tools, which is its own separate conversation.
Well, that's
Yeah.
coming next. You're doing a good job of this.
Yes. But if school districts took the money that they put in to paying for these programs every year and instead bought physical updated materials, like when I taught social studies, they had not had materials adoption in 15 years. Like
Oh my gosh.
there had been entire classes of students who had gone K-12 and the textbooks had not been updated. So, and I work in an affluent place. So what are you supposed to do then? Well, you can't use out of date information. So you have to use what's available. So then it's all online. So it's a very interconnected thing. So I would say I wish there was much less tech reliance in school. And the way to do that, again, is really, really complex. Many teachers had to completely reinvent the way they teach overnight 5 years ago during COVID.
Oh, yeah, that's true too.
And then we kind of removed a lot of the supports that were in place beforehand, so that when we went, quote unquote, back to normal, those supports weren't there anymore. So then the instruction couldn't actually change. The number of students who have one-to-one devices increased significantly between 2020 pre-COVID and 2022, and now is like 90% of students have a one-to-one device. And it's still that high, right? So we could decide to go backward. We could decide to not have that anymore, but we would have to put back in those supplements of hands-on materials. And a lot of that has to do with the way that we measure teaching and effectiveness. It's a very complicated problem, but I would love to see less need for it. But unfortunately, it's not something that's a snap of the fingers.
No, gosh, that is the truth. Wow. You know, Ash, one of the things that I was thinking about as you were speaking, because we've got the teachers and the parents, we have our own relationship to tech, right? And we have the rise of AI coming. There's a lot of fear around that. There's also a lot of excitement around it. What do you think the best advice might be for the adults in their own journey for their own use of tech? Not thinking about their children so much, but should they be nervous about AI? Should they be on social media? How should we see tech in our own lives? You know, I shared that adorable story of the little 7-year-old going to Chick-fil-A because I thought it was so ironic that it came from a book that was recommending no phones for children, but she's filming the whole thing and sharing it on, right? Like we have this complicated feeling, we all have a craving to share. I mean, that's been proven decidedly by the rise of the internet. Like the door swung open and everybody found a way to get on there and start writing and sharing. So clearly it's meeting some kind of a need. How do we think about the future of tech as adults?
There's so much in there. I'm just saying my entry point here.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah. So again, I know this is probably not a popular thing to say, and I'm probably seems surprising to many people, since I am a very person who talks about technology in a more neutral way. Some would say positive. I have never used my child's real name on the internet in their entire life.
That's incredible.
And I don't say that to be like sanctimonious, but my child was over 4 when I started my social media that I do now. So this was not because I was already online in a more public way. It was always, in my perspective, about consent and assent. And in my mind, it was, this is a human being with autonomy one day, right? And my job, like we say to our kid all the time, our job is to keep you safe. And we say that all the time. And many parents will say that about why their kid shouldn't have a cell phone. Right?
Yeah.
It's not safe. I'm trying to keep you safe. Okay. I agree. And if that is true, then when it comes to technology, then we have to be sure that until our kids are in control of their relationship to technology or what technology knows about them, we have to be in charge of that. And so we have to be prioritizing their safety as well. And there are many ways that we can have those conversations with kids where they aren't even using the technology, right? Like I can talk to my kid about why I call my child WB on the internet. They have never been called that. So like to them, it's funny because that is not who they are.
Yeah.
It's not their in-person nickname. So, but we talk all the time about like, why do I call you WB? Why has this always been something I've done? Well, you get to decide what information you put out onto the internet. You can't make that decision right now. One day you will. And until then, my job is to keep you safe. And I don't want to share anything to the internet about you that you wouldn't like.
Mm.
So I'm sharing as little as I can or as anonymously as I can so that when you do go online, you can treat that really carefully and seriously. To me, that's going to show them I take this seriously, so you can take it seriously.
Yes. Yes. No, that's really beautiful. I think it's something that we didn't understand when the internet first began.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I do remember though, at the very, very beginning in the late 90s, we all use pseudonyms for everything. The email addresses, people, I had a retreat at my house in 2001 for women I had met online, and at that point there were no photographs, so I'd never seen pictures of these people, and I was inviting them all to stay at my house. I had met them through some kind of homeschooling discussion board, and everyone was saying, "How do you know they're not axe murderers?" And that became the nickname of our retreat, the axe murderers, and they were all just like these homeschool moms, like the nicest people on the planet. But there was a lot more anxiety and fear back then. I remember when I started my blog, somebody commented on it that I didn't know, and I immediately made it private after one comment because I was so nervous that someone I didn't know was reading my writing uninvited. Like that's how it felt in the 90s. And so it's really interesting to see where we are today, how far we've come, and then now we're kind of like pruning that branch back, right? We're saying, okay, maybe we overdid it, showing our babies from the time that they're out of the womb, all the way through 18, all their changes without them even having a say. I really appreciate that. So now talk to me a little bit about AI and where that's going. We see it already showing up a little bit in politics where someone can say, oh, I didn't write that, that was AI, or I didn't say that, that was AI. And then we're left with this ambiguity about whether or not it really was AI. What do you think about all that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, unfortunately, you can't unring a bell. And so I think that we can wish it were different and irrespective of how we might feel personally, like this is the reality that we're in. And at this conference I just attended, I was really, really glad that there were some student voices, some kids, some teens that were there. And there was a session actually about AI and generative AI, specifically like within education. And I wasn't entirely surprised to hear some of this, but it was very, very eye-opening. Some statistics that were shared was that 7 out of 10 teens that were surveyed anyway, have used Gen AI in some way. But of those 70% of teens, their parents, when asked, like, has your kid used Gen AI? Of the kids who said, yes, I have, only 37% of their parents thought that they had.
Oh, classic.
And expanding just to all the parents, only half of those caregivers had conversations with their kids about Gen AI, and the vast majority of teens said that their teachers in school had not talked to them. So I think that there is an assumption that digital literacy is coming from somewhere else.
Yes.
And the answer is it's probably not coming from anywhere unless you're doing it. Only 4 states have a requirement for public K-12 schools to teach digital literacy.
Wow.
Only 4, which is horrible, right? We are way past the point for that. Almost every state has a requirement that kids have technology skills, which is why we see things like access to these things. But obviously, that's not the same thing. I mean, that's like saying everyone has access to a car, but no one has taken driving lessons, right?
Yeah,
like we're not giving them the skills.
Yeah, no driver's ed. Wow.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So we have very few states that are requiring teaching of these skills. And perplexingly, only 4 states, but a different 4 states, require teachers to have training in teaching digital literacy skills.
Wow.
So, unfortunately, if we think that educators are going to be teaching these skills, they may, but it is very rarely going to be a guarantee. So, the more that we can have these conversations, the better. And it's okay, I would say, if you're coming from a place of ignorance, of like,
Yes.
I don't know. It is okay to say, I don't know. I think it's one of the most powerful things you can say to a kid
And you
as a
can
teacher.
and you can learn.
Yes.
I mean, my book that just came out yesterday, as of this broadcast,
Oh,
Help My Kid
congratulations.
Hates Writing, has a whole chapter on writing in AI. I know your book,
Yes.
I'm sure, must address AI and Power On. Yes.
Yeah. So I would say that many of the skills that I talk about can be applied to many things, tech
Yes.
or not, or varying aspects of tech. So things like how deciding if something is safe or not, or
Yes.
creating boundaries around things, or knowing what is maybe causing a pain point with this particular thing, whether that's AI, video games, or something
Right.
else. But having those opportunities with kids, especially like tweens and teens, to really model and sit down together
Right.
and do something together, or just explain to them something that you've tried and what you learned. I've done several reels of what I call like 90-second digital literacy lessons. And one that I did that I think is really eye-opening for people is I said, okay, I just want you to, like, with your kid, open up a Gen AI, ChatGPT or whatever, and I want you to ask it to give you a random number between 1 and 100. And do it once and then refresh and paste in the question again. Do it 10 times in a row. 7 out of 10 times, it will give you 42 as the answer.
That's not random.
Right. And if you insist that it's random, like if you just say, give me a number between 1 and 100, it'll say 42. If you insist that it's a random number, 4 out of 10 times, it'll give you 57. And another 3 out of 10 times, it'll give you 52 or 67. None of the numbers ever involved an 8 or a 9 or a 1. And
Okay, that
even
is
that,
fascinating.
and it's a great way of being able to say, like, why is this? And to talk about, Gen AI or AI tools are made by human beings.
Yeah.
So they aren't thinking, right?
No.
They are programmed, and they are programmed to give answers like a human would. And that's very different than like a calculator, for
Yes,
example.
that's true.
Right.
I know, which gets compared to it a lot, but they're not the same. A
No.
calculator is actually running an algorithm and coming up with an answer, but generative AI is actually just pattern seeking. In fact, this morning I was actually using it because sometimes it's helpful for brainstorming.
Oh, yeah.
So I went in and while it was doing its thinking, it said reasoning. And I was like, you're not reasoning. Don't you bullshit me.
Right.
Like that is not what's going on right now. You are hunting for patterns and you are looking for the most likely set of words that would follow my prompt. And that really is a distinction. It's worth making that distinction for ourselves, but also for our kids. Absolutely.
And there's
letting
many
them know
ways-
that. Yeah.
And there's many ways to do that without literally using AI, right? Like
Yes.
digital literacy is like, okay, if you have any assistant type software in your home, Alexa, Siri, Google, whatever, one of those, right? Talk to your kids about, like, is this a person? Do they have a person? Do they have a personality?
Yeah.
When they're giving us an answer, is this their opinion?
Yeah.
Like, who is this? Or, just any, like, talking through it just to make it clear, like, and just to hear what they have to say, to be able to find those entry points of, like, what is it that they maybe do or do not understand, so that where you might need to follow up and give a little bit more help to fill in those gaps.
I was reading this morning a discussion of these professors who were talking about their students using AI to write papers. And this one professor had given the topic that included racism. And the student turned in a chat GPT generated essay with the sentence in it that said, as an AI, I do not have a lived experience, but humans do. And the student didn't even bother to read the paper to notice that the AI had included that sentence. And I really think that that's why, your principles of how we engage with tech, developing ethics, responsible behaviors, becoming familiar with the values behind the tech that you're using are so important, that this digital literacy actually matters. It's not how to use the thing, but why to use it, when to use it, in what context it serves you best. So Ash, your work is so wonderful, and we are so lucky to have you. Can you tell people about your new book and also where to find you online?
Thank you so much. And it was so fun to be back here with you. Feels like no time has passed, and also like a whole era, right, of our lives. So online, you can find me on Instagram at The Gamer Educator. I also have a Substack under the same name, The Gamer Educator. And that's basically just a way to get my content that isn't through Instagram. So if you're trying to distance yourself from your own social media and you would like to receive that a different way, my Substack is all the same content, but just delivered to your email inbox, all the convenience and none of the algorithm, right?
Nice.
So win-win.
Love that.
Then my book is called Power On: Managing Screen Time to Benefit the Whole Family. Ooh. And it's what covers everything from, keeping kids safe, building those skills, figuring out what is the problem? Where does it lie? What do I do about it? And also goes through a lot of the research to say, what do we really know? Where are we maybe overly worried? Maybe we're not worried enough, and hopefully can really grow with you as your kids grow. And it is coming out at end of August 26th, but you can pre-order it now wherever you prefer to buy books.
Amazing. I can't wait to read it. It's going to be so valuable to everyone. Thanks for coming today, Ash. We really love having you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that's another Brave Writer episode in the books. Thanks for joining Melissa and me today. We love it when you leave us reviews, when you send us comments via text message. We read them all. We also couldn't do this show without our fabulous production team at Nova, or Jeanette Hall, the Brave Writer team member who handles all those administrative details you know nothing about. In the meantime, we hope that you have a fantastic week. Keep going, think well. We're rooting for you.